Los Angeles pulsed with restless energy, a city that never truly slept. The neon glow of billboards flickered against the pavement, casting distorted shadows as the hum of traffic echoed through the streets. Among the endless blur of faces and hurried footsteps, one figure sat motionless, blending into the forgotten corners of the city. Clint Eastwood had always been a man who observed rather than engaged. Years of navigating Hollywood had sharpened his instincts, making him acutely aware of his surroundings. But as he stepped away from the controlled chaos of the film set and into the unpredictable world of reality, something strange happened. A presence in the periphery of his vision pulled his attention. A man hunched over on the curb, wrapped in a tattered coat, unmoving beneath the artificial glow of a nearby streetlight. At first glance, he appeared to be just another lost soul swallowed by the city's indifference, just another forgotten shadow among thousands. But something about him was wrong, eerily familiar in a way Clint couldn't immediately place. As he moved closer, his gut twisted with an inexplicable sense of unease. The man's features, barely illuminated under the dim streetlight, bore an unsettling resemblance to Clint himself. The silver-streaked hair, the angular jawline, the deep lines of experience carved into his weathered skin. It was like staring at a ghost, a reflection warped by time and circumstance. Yet it wasn't just the appearance that unnerved him. It was the way the man moved. Every subtle shift, adjusting his coat, rubbing a hand over his chin, mirrored Clint's own unconscious habits. The motions were too precise to be coincidence, too natural to be mimicry. For a long moment, neither moved, the weight of an unspoken recognition settling between them. The city noise faded into a dull hum, replaced by the thudding pulse in Clint's ears. He had spent a lifetime bringing stories to life, stepping into roles that blurred the line between reality and fiction. But this was different. This wasn't scripted. A chill settled over him, instinct whispering that this was more than just a strange look-alike, more than a trick of the mind. There was something deeper here, something he couldn't explain yet. The air between them felt charged, thick with an invisible thread pulling him toward an answer he wasn't sure he wanted. And in that instant, Clint knew this was no ordinary encounter. This was something bigger, something he would never forget. The moment lingered, heavy and unshakable. The city carried on, oblivious, but for Clint Eastwood, time seemed to slow. That man, this eerie reflection of himself, was not just some stranger lost in the shadows of Los Angeles. There was a connection here, one he could not yet comprehend, but it gnawed at him like an itch beneath his skin. As the night deepened, Clint found himself unable to shake the encounter. The lines of the man's face, the unspoken weight behind his stare, the way his movements had echoed Clint's own, all of it haunted him. There was recognition in those eyes, but not in the way a fan might look at a Hollywood legend. This was something different, deeper. Sleep came in restless fits that night. The subconscious played cruel tricks, feeding him fragmented memories, flashes of desert landscapes, blurred faces, voices echoing from a time long buried. He woke up with a sensation of falling, gasping as though he had been pulled from a place he wasn't meant to return to. By morning, the questions had only multiplied. He needed answers. Against better judgment, Clint returned to the place where he had seen the man. The streets, alive with early commuters and the occasional flicker of neon signs still buzzing from the night before, felt different now. Every corner, every shadow seemed heavier, as if something unseen lurked beneath the surface of normalcy. The man was there, exactly where Clint had left him. It was as though he had never moved, as though he had been waiting, knowing Clint would return. The city moved around him, but he remained still, a relic of something long past. But something was different now, a shift in the atmosphere. The way the man held himself, the way his gaze carried an unspoken urgency. He wasn't just lingering in this place, he was expecting something. And then it clicked. This wasn't just about resemblance or coincidence. This man, this stranger, was watching him, studying him. It was a realization that sent a chill through Clint's spine. He had been in the public eye for decades, seen by millions across the world. But this was different. This wasn't admiration. It wasn't the look of a fan recognizing an actor. This was the gaze of a man who knew something, something Clint had forgotten. The unease deepened. Suddenly, the rhythm of the city shifted. A car, sleek and unmarked, crept down the street, too slow, too deliberate. Clint wasn't a man easily spooked, but instincts, honed from years of navigating both Hollywood's illusions and the raw unpredictability of real life, flared inside him like a warning bell. The man on the curb shifted, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his body betrayed him. He knew. And that was when Clint realized the truth. This wasn't just some homeless man. This was someone who had been waiting for him, and now they weren't alone. Something dangerous was about to unfold, and Clint Eastwood was at the center of it. The moment stretched, thick with a tension Clint Eastwood hadn't felt in years. The world around him moved at its usual pace, cars honking, pedestrians lost in their own routines. But in this small pocket of the city, time stood still. The stranger remained seated, unmoving, his face an unreadable mask. But Clint could see it now. This was not a coincidence. The man had been waiting for him. He had expected this. And that realization changed everything. Then the car. It moved too slowly, too deliberately, its windows tinted just enough to hide the occupants within. Clint had seen enough in his lifetime to know what it meant. This wasn't just an idle vehicle rolling through the streets of Los Angeles. It was watching, waiting. A surge of instinct kicked in. He wasn't just being observed, he was being hunted. The man on the curb remained still, his posture rigid. He knew it too. He had felt it before. The weight of invisible eyes, the silent presence of something unseen creeping closer. Then the shift. The car braked. A moment of unnatural stillness followed. The city's noise faded, muted beneath the pulse pounding in Clint's ears. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. Then the door opened. A figure emerged. Dark suit, controlled movements. A man who belonged to the world of shadows. Clint had spent his life playing out confrontations like this in film, choreographed scenes of suspense and danger. But this was different. There were no cameras, no rehearsals. This was real. The stranger on the curb reacted first. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. There was no panic in his movements, only a quiet readiness. A man who had done this before. A man who had seen what came next. Clint felt the pull of something deep in his memory, a whisper of recognition just out of reach. And then it hit him. This wasn't just a chance meeting. This was a message, a warning. And whatever it was, whatever the past had buried, it was about to rise again. The man in the suit took a step forward, and Clint Eastwood knew his life was about to change forever. The air felt heavier now, thick with the kind of tension Clint Eastwood hadn't experienced in years. The man in the suit moved with slow, calculated precision, his posture controlled, his presence carrying an unspoken authority. This wasn't a casual encounter. This wasn't chance. This was intent. Clint's instincts screamed at him, warning him that whatever was unfolding in front of him was bigger than it appeared. The stranger on the curb, the eerie familiarity of his face, the subtle but deliberate way he had been waiting, none of it was a coincidence. And now, with this new arrival, the pieces of a puzzle Clint didn't know he was a part of had begun to shift. The man in the suit didn't acknowledge Clint right away. His gaze was fixed on the homeless man, assessing, measuring. The exchange between them was silent, but layered with a depth Clint could sense. This wasn't the first time they had crossed paths. There was history here, buried beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. Then, without a word, the stranger on the curb turned and started walking. Not away, not toward safety, but straight into the unknown. Clint felt a pull deep in his gut, an instinct beyond logic telling him to follow. The suited man remained still, his eyes flicking to Clint now, as if silently daring him to make a move. But Clint wasn't the kind of man to be controlled. He had spent decades playing characters who ran toward danger rather than away from it. And this moment was no different. He followed. The city blurred around him, the footsteps of the stranger ahead steady and unhurried. They weaved through back alleys, past forgotten corners of Los Angeles, where the noise of the world seemed to fade. Clint didn't speak. He didn't demand answers. He didn't need to. He knew they were coming. The two men finally stopped in a secluded alleyway, away from prying eyes. The silence between them was thick, but Clint could feel it. Something unspoken passing between them, something buried deep in a past he had long since left behind. And then the truth began to emerge. The man wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't just someone down on his luck. He was someone who had once been part of Clint's story. A story Clint had forgotten, or perhaps a story someone had erased. And now, after all these years, it had come back. Waiting, watching, ready to pull him back in. Whatever this was, whatever had been set in motion, Clint knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just an observer. He was a target. And the past wasn't finished with him yet. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken, something unfinished. Clint Eastwood stood in the dim alleyway, the faint hum of the city a distant echo beyond the concrete walls. The stranger, this man who had mirrored his every move, who had carried the weight of a past Clint didn't yet understand, waited, as if expecting Clint to be the first to speak. But words weren't necessary. The truth was coming, whether Clint was ready or not. The atmosphere shifted, the past pressing in like a thick fog, suffocating, inevitable. The man before him wasn't just a look-alike, wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was something more, something buried deep in the fabric of Clint's own history. And now that history had clawed its way to the surface. Memories, hazy, distant, fractured, began to stir. Images he couldn't quite grasp. A younger version of himself standing in a place far from Hollywood. Sand, heat, the metallic scent of gunpowder in the air, the echo of shouted commands. Not a film set, not a performance, something real, something dangerous. The stranger's posture remained still, but his presence spoke volumes. He had seen it too. He had been there. Clint's mind reeled, struggling to make sense of it. He had spent decades crafting stories, stepping into roles that blurred the line between fiction and reality. But this wasn't a script. This wasn't a character. This was his life. And there was a part of it he had forgotten, or worse, one that had been taken from him. The man shifted slightly, his gaze unwavering. There was no mistaking the weight of recognition in his eyes. He wasn't here by accident. He wasn't here by coincidence. He was here because something had been set in motion long ago. And now the consequences had come knocking. A shadow loomed at the alley's entrance. The suited man from before, watching, waiting. The walls of the past had cracked, and through them the truth was beginning to seep through. Whatever this was, whatever Clint had unknowingly been part of, it wasn't over. It had never been over. And now, after all these years, the past had finally caught up with him. There was no turning back, only forward, straight into the unknown. The weight of something long buried pressed down on Clint Eastwood's chest. The night air felt colder now, thick with the presence of something unseen but undeniable. The pieces were there, scattered like fragments of a film reel burned at the edges. Memories just out of reach, moments erased or hidden, waiting for the right time to surface. And that time was now. The stranger, his eerie resemblance to Clint no longer a mere coincidence, stood firm, his presence a silent confirmation of the truth that was about to be unraveled. And just beyond them, the suited figure loomed at the entrance of the alley, his stillness more unsettling than movement. He wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to make sure none of them were answered. Everything inside Clint screamed that he was at the precipice of something irreversible. The past wasn't just haunting him, it was hunting him. And then, in a rush, it all came back. A name, a place, a moment frozen in time, buried beneath decades of carefully constructed reality. It hadn't been a film set, it hadn't been a role. It had been real, the Middle East. A covert operation that had gone wrong. A mission tangled in the shadows of politics and power, hidden behind the illusion of a Hollywood production. Clint had been there, not as an actor, not as a director, but as an unwitting pawn in something much larger than himself. And this man, the one who had been waiting for him, had been there too. Not as a stranger, as a savior. The realization struck like a gunshot. This man had saved Clint's life once, pulling him from the fire of a mission he had never even known he was part of. And now, years later, he had returned. Not for gratitude, not for recognition, but because the people who had orchestrated it all were tying up loose ends. And Clint Eastwood was the last loose end. The man in the suit took a step forward, slow, measured, final. He wasn't here to negotiate. Clint's breath steadied, his heart no longer pounding in panic, but burning with something deeper. Resolve, understanding. He had spent a lifetime playing men who stood their ground, who faced the darkness head-on. But this wasn't a role, this wasn't a performance. This was real. The past had finally caught up with him. And now he had a choice. Run or fight. The answer had been written in his bones long before this moment. As the city buzzed unaware beyond the alley, Clint Eastwood squared his shoulders. The time for questions was over. The time for answers had arrived. And he was ready. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing stories. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.